In Missouri versus Holland, the federal government's treaty power flew strong when the United States Supreme Court upheld a statute that protected migratory birds. In 1916, President Woodrow Wilson entered into a treaty with Great Britain that provided greater protection for migratory birds. To put the treaty into effect, Congress passed the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, which prohibited the killing, capturing, or selling of the birds protected by the treaty. Before the bird treaty was negotiated, there was an earlier attempt by Congress to protect migratory birds. 5 years earlier, Congress, without a treaty, had passed a law regulating the killing of migratory birds. But a district court struck down that statute as unconstitutional because it exceeded Congress's powers under the Commerce Clause. So, after that law was invalidated, the federal government attempted to achieve the same result by entering into a treaty with Great Britain. In response, the state of Missouri filed a lawsuit alleging that the treaty, as implemented by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, was an unconstitutional interference with the powers reserved to the states by the 10th Amendment. The states, according to Missouri, had absolute control of wild game and birds within the state's borders. The district court disagreed with Missouri and held that the act of Congress implementing the treaty was constitutional. On direct appeal to the United States Supreme Court, the issue was whether Congress can use its treaty power to protect migratory birds even when an equivalent statute wouldn't pass muster under the Commerce Clause. The court held that Congress can implement measures pursuant to a validly enacted treaty that it couldn't otherwise implement through its other constitutional authorities, such as the commerce power. Justice Holmes, writing for the 7-2 court, held that the Migratory Bird Treaty Act was a valid exercise of the federal government's treaty powers. First, Holmes noted that Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution allows the President to make a treaty, subject to ratification by 2/3 of the Senate. The Migratory Bird Treaty satisfied these requirements. Nevertheless, Missouri argued that the treaty interfered with its 10th Amendment rights. The court rejected the state's argument, reasoning that the 10th Amendment didn't apply here. The 10th Amendment reserves to the states only those governmental powers that haven't been delegated to the federal government. Here, the case dealt not with an ordinary statute, but with a treaty, and the treaty-making power has been delegated to the federal government under Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution. Therefore, the authority under which Congress enacted the Migratory Bird Treaty Act was separate from the residual powers reserved to the states by the 10th Amendment. The court also noted that under the Supremacy Clause, all treaties made under the authority of the United States, along with the Constitution and federal laws, are the supreme law of the land. All statutes passed to implement a valid treaty are also constitutional under the Necessary and Proper Clause, which permits congressional acts that are necessary and proper to execute Congress's other constitutional powers. Thus, the Supremacy Clause and the Necessary and Proper Clause allowed Congress to implement the treaty, even if it meant touching on activities falling purely within a state's borders and usually left up to state regulation. Therefore, the court upheld the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and affirmed the district court decision. Since it was decided, Missouri versus Holland has been heavily criticized for unreasonably broadening the federal government's treaty-making powers. Its holding was later challenged in the 2014 case of Bond versus United States, but the Supreme Court declined to overrule it.